Look at your own skin for a moment. Go ahead, give it a little tug. It stretches when you move, right? It keeps all your insides perfectly safe and contained. And out in the wild, an animal's skin is doing that exact same beautiful job. But when an animal dies, that skin changes. Out in the cold air, it just dries up and gets incredibly hard. Or, out in the warm rain, it completely rots away. Early humans are facing a pretty massive problem out there in the elements. They desperately needed clothes to survive those freezing winters, and they knew animal skins could keep them warm. But wearing raw skins was just a disaster. They would get completely stiff in the cold, or they'd literally just rot right off their backs in the warm rain. They had to find a way to stop that awful rotting. So they started by scraping the skins completely clean, taking off all the hair and meat with sharp rocks. Then they'd stretch them out on large wooden frames to let the sun dry them out. But even then, the skins were way too hard to wear. Then they noticed something kind of fascinating happening around their campfires. The meat they hung over the flames wasn't rotting at all. The smoke was somehow keeping the bugs and bacteria completely away. So they started hanging the animal skins over their fires, letting that thick smoke just fill up the skin. And it actually worked. The skins lasted so much longer. Now, smoked skins were great for not rotting, but they were still pretty stiff. Imagine trying to run or hunt wearing clothes that rigid. They needed soft clothes to actually move around in. So they got a little creative, rubbing animal fat and even the animal's brains right into the skin. Those heavy oils coated the skin fibers, and as people pulled and stretched these oily skins over smooth logs, they became incredibly soft. They were finally surviving those harsh freezing winters in comfort. But there was a pretty tragic catch. Whenever it rained, the water would just wash all that fat and brain matter right out. The magic would disappear and the skin would go completely rock hard again. They needed a permanent fix, something the rain could absolutely never wash away. And it turns out, nature was hiding the secret all along, right in the trees. See, trees have this special juice in their bark called tannin, which tastes really bitter to bugs. And somebody, way back when, must have been just hanging out, watching leaves falling into puddles, watching the water slowly turn this deep, rich brown. They noticed that if animal skins were left in this brown water, they started changing colors. So they started soaking raw skins in bark water, leaving them in there for months and months, just watching this slow, hidden change happening deep inside. What was actually happening in that murky water is pretty wild. The tree juice locked right onto the skin fibers, like a microscopic jigsaw puzzle snapping perfectly into place. It was tying all the skin fibers together super tightly, completely pushing out all the water. We call this permanent change tanning. It meant that skin would absolutely never rot again. Water couldn't wash that tree juice away anymore. The skin stayed perfectly strong and wonderfully soft. It wasn't just skin anymore. It had become true leather. Think about how massive that was. They had basically invented a super material, tougher than any leaves or woven grass, and it would last for years and years. This incredibly durable stuff completely shifted human history. Suddenly, people were making tough shoes to protect their feet, meaning they could walk safely over miles of sharp rocks and travel way farther than they ever dreamed. They were cutting thin strips to use as strong ropes, tying massive wooden poles together to build giant tents. And as humans started riding horses, they needed a way to stay balanced safely, so they built heavy leather saddles. We could suddenly travel enormous distances on horseback, spreading entirely new ideas all over the world. It even changed how we survived battles. Metal armor back then was just ridiculously heavy. But soldiers discovered that if they boiled leather in hot water and wax, it changed entirely. It stopped sharp arrows like a rigid wooden shield hidden inside a flexible skin. It was this incredibly lightweight, insanely strong protection that you could actually move in. And it didn't just save human lives, it saved our ideas. When people started writing their most important thoughts down on delicate paper, they needed a way to protect those pages from the elements. So they bound them inside heavy leather covers. Those leather books lasted for centuries. Human knowledge, stories, our entire history was literally saved from being destroyed by wrapping it in animal skin. For the longest time, this whole soaking in tree bark thing was how it was done. But it was intensely slow, taking months to soak and tan a batch of skins. And as towns grew into cities, people needed way more material than the slow bark method could ever keep up with. So scientists started looking for a shortcut. They eventually discovered a special metal called chromium. And when they mixed that chromium with water, it changed the game completely. The chromium tanning process was like hitting a fast forward button on a TV remote, rushing all of nature's slow work into a day. Suddenly, factory machines were churning massive loads of skins in giant wooden drums, and the leather would come out totally soft and weirdly blue in just a day. But all that speed came with a pretty heavy cost. The metal chemicals used in the chromium process were incredibly messy, and they deeply hurt the rivers and the soil around the factories. Making leather that fast creates huge amounts of dirty water, which is really tough to see happening to the environment. Fortunately, people woke up to the damage. Today, factories are actively cleaning up their mess. They figured out how to clean the water before it ever leaves the building, trapping those harmful chemicals safely. And what's really beautiful is that we still use that slow, ancient tree bark method today. It takes longer, but it makes this wonderfully stiff, earth-friendly leather. You might wonder where all this material actually comes from today. The vast majority of it comes from cows that are already being raised for meat and milk. The skin itself is really just a leftover part. If people weren't making leather, all that skin would just rot. It would literally get thrown away into huge, wasteful trash piles. Tanning actually rescues all these leftover skins from the garbage. When you really think about it, this entire ancient process is basically human history's most successful form of recycling. You're taking this incredibly fragile waste product that nobody knows what to do with and giving it a strong, completely permanent second life. And that second life lasts a remarkably long time. A good, real leather belt can easily last decades. It breathes naturally, and when it finally does wear out, way down the line, it just turns back into dirt. Now compare that to the fake plastic stuff you see everywhere. Fake leather is just made from oil. It breaks and peels super fast, and when you throw it away, it just sits there in the ground forever. Real leather is different. It behaves in this totally living way. It actually breathes, letting air pass right through to keep you cool. It stretches to fit your exact shape, molding perfectly to you over time. It even gets dark spots from the sun and softens precisely in the spots where you bend it. That's why every single scratch on an old leather bag is basically a memory. It shows exactly where you've been and what you've done. As it ages, pieces never look exactly alike. Every mark, every worn edge tells a completely personal story about the person carrying it. It's wild to think about this totally unbroken journey. This exact same material that protected our ancestors from freezing during the Ice Age, helping us build civilization from the ground up, is the exact same material catching fastballs in a baseball glove today, or surviving blistering hot summers sitting in our car seats. We are using the exact same basic science as early humans. We just happen to do it a little faster now. When you see it that way, leather really is human survival woven right into a material. It transforms nature's fragile leftovers into lasting strength, meaning we are literally carrying our history on our shoulders and our feet. Taking something so vulnerable and making it permanent is an absolute gift of time and chemistry. If you enjoyed wandering through all this with me, drop a like, share this with someone who loves a good story, and hit subscribe. But it does make you wonder, way in the future, what materials will humans dig up to tell the story of how we survive today?